Welcome to this tutorial on review articles. In this tutorial, we're going to examine two different types of reviews, the narrative review and the systematic review, so that you can appreciate how they differ in breadth, scope, and rigor. Most importantly, I want you to be able to recognize a review article when you see one, and know that review articles produce no new data, but rather analyze and synthesize the data and results found in primary studies. Lastly, recognize that each type of review has value for its stated purpose and adds to the scholarly conversation. This review article begins much like the research article we looked at before. The title is followed by the author and their credentials, and then there's an abstract summarizing the entire article, and as we scroll down to the bottom of this first page, we see the author's affiliations. I want to scroll back up to the abstract. I think this particular abstract is a little bit deceiving because it lists a method and results section. Often narrative review articles won't have a particular methodology that they use because there's no study design, no study being carried out, although they may mention how they search the literature. There's also a results section listed here. This is not the same type of results that we're talking about with a primary study because no data has been produced here. So when you see results in this particular abstract, you might be thrown off. You won't be thrown off as we go through the article and you see the absence of a methods section in the article or the absence of the results section. It's perfectly understandable why they're not there based on the purpose of the review article. I also want to scroll up and mention this said it was a contemporary review. Contemporary review is just another terminology for narrative review or literature review. As I scroll through, here's the introduction, and you'll notice this introduction doesn't have a separate literature review section because the entire article is a literature review. When I read aloud the purpose of the review, which is stated in the final paragraph of this section, you'll notice that it has a much broader focus than our singular primary studies. So, reading aloud, this review covers current research that focuses on the components and potential health risks associated with electronic cigarette vapor and presents a thorough comparison of the components and known health problems of tobacco cigarette smoking. Acute or chronic and active or passive vaping on complete blood count, lung function, myocardial function is investigated and reported to present potential disease burden. Think back to how this differs from a primary article that might just be studying lung function, a primary article that studies a particular population on myocardial function. So the review article is going to bring this all together. And you'll notice that it identifies themes from the articles it chooses. So we'll scroll through positive aspects, negative aspects. As I scroll through, combustion versus vaporization. And then there's all these subsections. Within each of these sections, if I scroll up, you'll see that there are citations throughout. That's the literature they're reviewing. So as we go down, you'll notice that it never mentions a method section. As we scroll through, you see these themes that they're talking about, but we don't see a results section, but we do have a conclusion section. It does bring everything together. And it does end with suggestions for future research. And this is what it does. It presents what we know at this time on this topic, but it's saying there are some unanswered questions, and here's where the next researcher can carry it forward. And we see this also in primary literature. Notice the bibliography section at the end that references all those studies included within the review. Even if your assignment calls for a primary study, you can use a review article to flesh out a primary study. Take the citation information and then use our journal finder to see if we have it full text, or use interlibrary loan to get it. As I scroll to the bottom, you'll see the end of the article, and I'm going to scroll back up slowly through this bibliography. and through the entire article to give you the sense of the extent of the literature review. Keep this in mind as we go forward and take a look at the systematic review. This comparison article is clearly labeled Review Article, but the title gives it away. It's a systematic review. Even if it did not, it would quickly become apparent when we begin to read. Let's scroll through, and here we'll find the abstract. And I think of the format of a systematic review as a bit of a hybrid between a primary article and a review article. Because like a primary article, it will have an abstract, introduction, methodology, results, discussion, and conclusion section. But like a review article, it reviews and analyzes other studies, unlike a primary study that has individual participants or data representing those singular participants. Here we're looking at the abstract, and you'll notice that the terminology is a little bit different. Here we see context, but that's actually the introduction, and it states the purpose of the research. Evidence acquisition and evidence synthesis are methods and results. And then we have the conclusion. So don't let terminology throw you. Look at what it's telling you. The nature of a systematic review is that it must be an exhaustive, comprehensive, systematic search of all relevant studies on the question or topic it's reviewing, because it's used to make clinical decisions or practice decisions, and it must weigh all available evidence that can be found. The hallmark of the systematic review is that it's very transparent on how it was conducted. And one of the hallmarks is that it lists the inclusion and exclusion criteria of the articles that are used in the review. So for this particular review, we've come across a flow chart that tells me that they started with 1,633 articles they used searching PubMed. And that's another hallmark. It will tell me what databases were used to search the literature. Now, using this on the right-hand side, you can see they began to exclude articles, so that in the end, they used 687 articles according to that inclusion-exclusion criteria listed in the methodology. As I scroll through, you'll see under evidence acquisition, it tells us how they did their PubMed search, and it links us out to an appendix, which is available online and here in the citation. So I'm going to link out to that citation, go down to 107, and then link out to the systematic review protocol. A protocol is an outline or mapping as to how the systematic review is going to be done. This is done beforehand. So even though protocols are published and look very much like a research study, they are not completed studies. So it's just the outline, so don't be confused when you find one. So as I scroll through to the methods section, it tells me what the study design is going to be, what types of studies they're going to be looking for, and then the search methods so that I can go ahead and see what terms they put into the database to find the articles. Then I can also see how they are going to select the studies amongst what they find in the study selection. So this is what you might see directly in a systematic review, or it might link you out to this protocol. There's no set pattern, but a protocol is done beforehand. Now keep in mind, you can't use this for your article assignments, but you can use the information within them to help guide you in your search. So check out those keywords and use them in your searches when you have to do a search for your primary literature. Back at the systematic review, we can see that the collected studies were broken out into 9 themes or topics that will be discussed throughout the review. These are identified based on the final list of included studies. And as we scroll through, we get to the evidence synthesis section, which will take each of these themes and appraise the studies that address them. Reviewers examine study methodology, study characteristics, and the effects of interventions and outcomes, reaching a summative position. After each area is appraised, we'll get down to the discussion section, which is going to bring this all together for us. And then the study ends with limitations and a conclusion. And so we've seen those areas time and again, whether it's a primary research article or a review article. On the right-hand side, we have our references list. So I could scroll through and show you all the references, but I'm just going to go to the end of the document and scroll back up to show you that there are 811 citations in this entire systematic review. So that gives you some idea of the extent and the breadth of the systematic review. Often, a systematic review will include a meta-analysis, which even further bumps up the evidence. That's because a meta-analysis provides a statistical analysis of all the included studies to produce a singular result. This singular quantitative result is powerful for decision making. However, it's not required of a systematic review, and as in our example, it didn't have one. As we've seen, review articles share a bigger picture as one considers the landscape of studies addressing a particular research question or topic. Systematic reviews provide strong evidence for making clinical practice or workplace decisions. Bear in mind that they take considerable resources both in time, expertise, and finances, and they are considerably less prolific than narrative reviews, so you won't find one to address every question out there. Literature reviews do not have the rigorous methodology and appraisal of a systematic review and are not considered strong evidence for decision making. However, they are the backbone that justifies the undertaking of new primary studies, which do produce new evidence. Oftentimes, there are not enough primary studies to conduct a systematic review. The literature review fills the gap until more primary evidence surfaces. Standalone literature reviews, otherwise known as a narrative review, have done some of the work for us. They take the time to synthesize so that we can quickly understand the conversation surrounding a topic, and they present it to us in a very easily read format. So each type of review has its particular purpose and value in the conversations of research literature.